Hello. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to share what I studied with you, and also the fact that you're sitting through all of these incredible presentations. I'm so inspired by my fellow educators, and this is my first chance to learn a lot of what they've been doing, so thank you to all of you as well. Today I'm going to be talking about some research that I did on what I called the storytelling connection, and a curriculum that I ended up implementing through the storytelling connection called the Power of Language Unit. Today I'm just going to go through speaking about what was the question that I was aiming to answer, what drove that question, what was the background research that informed my curriculum design, how did I measure what I was trying to measure, what did the unit actually look like when I implemented it, and what were the effects of that unit as I measured them and as I observed, and then showing you guys a little bit of what my students created collaboratively throughout. So, at the beginning of the MAT program, Mike asked us to identify a problem. I choose to call this a challenge. And immediately I remember teaching 3rd grade and how every single time that I would bring up a writing assignment or a writing activity, many of my students would shut down completely. It wasn't even an option. It was like picking up the pencil was the weight of a cinder block on their desk. And they would just sit there and they wouldn't know what to say. Meanwhile, these are the same students that want to talk to me and tell me all their ideas. They want to talk to each other and tell each other all their ideas. So there's this resistance to writing. And I thought, what if I try to support and divert that resistance to writing by drawing on students' interest in speaking and in socializing? And so I wanted to use oral language to support writing, and I wanted to use specifically oral storytelling practice as the way that we were going to channel our speaking, to give it some direction, to give it some structure, to learn about different models of the English language as it's been used. And historically, I tried to research some of the indigenous storytelling practices that have taken place here in North America and how those have been supporting learning for thousands of years. So my thesis question that I came up with all of this combined: can oral storytelling practice improve students' enthusiasm and confidence in writing? So how I chose to measure that with my 6th grade class of 67 students from a fairly mixed classroom of socioeconomic status, but majority white students, was by implementing an 8-week curriculum, and every 2 weeks during the 8-week curriculum, I gave them the same prompt. It was an autobiographical prompt, and it said, tell me about anything that has happened to you in the last 2 weeks. Anything at all. Please write as much as you can, in as much detail as you can. You can write about anything that's happened, as long as it's true. And that was my prompt. And I gave them 10 minutes. And every 2 weeks, they had to answer that question. And I thought, at base level, what I want to measure is what's the word count that they come up with. So if I begin this study and I receive what I've been observing, they probably won't write almost anything. Or they'll at least resist it and sit there for long enough that it's a pretty low word count. And if I can increase their verboseness with their oral output, and that truly supports writing output, then by the end of the 8 weeks, they will be producing more words in 10 minutes written. I also collected work samples to track student participation and understanding. And I took observational notes, both at the time, and I also videotaped a lot of my lessons and went back and took notes on them. And so I tried to create sort of a narrative for myself to create a context for the numbers. So, my background research. In approaching the Power of Language unit, I did research on a couple different things. One was storytelling, and I came up with something that I call the storytelling cycle. What the storytelling cycle suggests is that we all have the most basic tools that we need to be storytellers, which is that we have experiences. All stories are drawn from experiences, which create emotion and memory. Those emotions and those memories and that continuum of experiences then requires a process to become a story that we can tell. So, the process is first discerning a story, beginning, middle, and end, something we want to say, something we want to communicate. Then refining that down, identifying what are the key points of this, what are the things that are really important within the huge number of senses and feelings and experiences that I had yesterday. What are the key points? And then how am I going to communicate those things really beautifully so that I involve my listener into the story and it becomes their experience. And then they can learn from that as well, and it can become their story. This is the power of storytelling. We don't have to learn by all making the same mistake if we tell stories. I also researched the 4 language functions of speaking, listening, reading, and writing, and tried to identify how those language functions have supported each other in classrooms over the last 50 years of educational research. And so I looked at things like dialogue journals, which combine speaking and writing to create sort of a conversational text between the teacher and the student, or theater performances that combine listening and reading and speaking to help support students in learning language. And so I created this. This is the Power of Language unit, which was an 8-week curriculum. I implemented it twice a week for an hour each time, and it went something like this. It began on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which was not planned. And I didn't know where I was going, and I was terrified. And we decided to watch the speech, "I Have Been to the Mountaintop," by Martin Luther King Jr., which is an incredibly powerful speech, as well as the last one that he gave publicly before he was assassinated. And my students didn't know that, but they knew that he had power. The reason why I called it the Power of Language unit was because I wanted my students to believe that the purpose of this unit was to teach them that language is magic, and that great language users are great magic users. And that Martin Luther King Jr. is an excellent example of somebody who used language as magic to change the world. And that was something that they had an option to do as well. So we watched this speech, and we came out of it and we said, what gives him his power? What made it so that Martin Luther King Jr. was able to change things just with what he said? Now, I didn't have an answer to that when I got into the classroom, but this is what we came up with. We said he draws from 2 power pools, tone and content. What is he saying? What is his message? The words that he is using about equality and about love and about respect. And then how is he saying those words? His confidence, his compassion, his belief. Those 2 things combined were sources of power for him. And they were supported by a structure of grammar. Because the things that he said weren't just good words, and they weren't just spoken well, they were also combined in a way that made sense. And he had prosody in his language, which means that his tones were natural and easy to understand, which often mirrors grammatical structures and punctuation, although not always, because we all know that if you tell a student to put a comma everywhere they pause, then they will have many more commas than they should. So, tone and content supported by grammar leads to communication. And communication is the key to storytelling. That's the source for the storytelling. So my students were able to start practicing their tone, practicing their content. They began seeing grammar not as an extra thing they had to keep track of, but actually as the key to participating in a collaborative story that we created as a class. And that was what the classes, for the most part, looked like, was an adventure story. in which the students all had their own character that they controlled, and they also had an opportunity to change the world as I was describing it, if they could communicate well. So, results. When I measured the word count the first week, 10 minutes, on average, the students got 106 words in 10 minutes. It's better than I was expecting. It's about 10 words a minute, but frankly, the first 5 minutes were spent groaning and mumbling and believing all of a sudden that their iPads were broken and it was just impossible for them to write. And then they became magical characters the next day and went before Duke James and had to team up and propose their planned mission that they wanted to go on and debate with me because I was Duke James and I got to lord it over the whole class and be much different than how I behaved as a teacher. And they got to behave very differently than they did as students because they weren't students anymore. They were the queen of darkness and they were fire itself and they were the moon and they had created all these incredible characters, and so they came forth with a different enthusiasm than I had ever seen. 2 weeks later, after 2 weeks of that, the word count jumped to 140 words. And I thought that that was a good sign, and that that indicated that we were on the right path. So we kept going, and Duke James sent them to go to the Freedom Day Festival, and then they discovered that they weren't actually attending it, they were planning it, and they had to plan the whole thing until they were ambushed by vampires and taken to a haunted castle, and then they had to escape the haunted castle and go into the magical forest. And all along, there were grammar puzzles, there were writing assignments, and most of all, there was oral improvisational practice taking place. And so by week 7, when we took our final assessment, the average word count had gone to 155 words in 10 minutes, which is an increase of about 150% over 8 weeks. So I think that that indicates great potential. The really exciting results go much deeper than that, of course. And I wish, looking back on this assignment, I wish that I had taken some more formal measurement of some of the student engagement, because that is where things really change. The engagement and enthusiasm for language arts went from language arts, I guess we all perceive our subject to be the one that's the most boring and the bottom of the barrel, but that's how I felt. And all of a sudden, language arts was the class people were excited to get to, right? Student participation skyrocketed, and I'm going to give some specific examples of that in a minute. And the camaraderie extended way beyond the class. So all of a sudden it was like, they're running into class early, asking if we're going to have the adventure that day. If we are going to have the adventure that day, there's groups, there's everybody getting together when they're given their assignments and their challenges. They're struggling and working really hard to get out of it because they're trying to get out of a haunted castle and there are vampires. And all of a sudden it's no longer a boring classroom with grammar being this like annoying thing that they're getting graded on. Instead, grammar has become how they cast spells. It's a whole different mindset. One student in particular that I was doing a case study of began with a word count of 88 words in 10 minutes, which was a little bit below the average. And she was a student that had been completely silent for the entirety of the first semester up until Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It was pretty much the first time that we started interacting with each other in class, during class time. By the second week of the unit, she was a daily participant in class. She was at the forefront of expression, coming up with ideas, suggesting things for the story. By the end of the 8 weeks, she had jumped to 292 words written in 10 minutes. So she dramatically changed. She just about tripled her word count over 8 weeks. And while I cannot claim that the Power of Language Unit is solely responsible for that, I do think that it had a very significant impact on the way that she felt about her self-expression. I had the students also reflect on their learning. They both filled out a survey with a Likert scale, ratings of their own engagement and learning during the unit, as well as having some free responses that they were able to choose to what they said. I picked some of my favorite things, which communicate that this unit helped them feel more creative, helped them feel that English and the specific functions of English, such as prepositions, were not so hard to understand, and that storytelling is the key to writing. They also generally said, about 77% said that the unit both improved their knowledge of writing sentences, as well as made them feel more excited about writing. So they both felt that they understood more about writing and that they were more excited about it. Here's a couple work samples that show some, so there was a great visual art component to this as well. And these are collaborative pieces that the students created. They were in small groups. Each sixth of that Queen of the Forest belonged to a group, and they had to write poetry in order to fill in the coloring. And then once the coloring was all the way filled in, they could combine their pictures and meet the Queen of the Forest, who had some cool magic powers. So, yes, oral storytelling practice can improve students' writing confidence and competence. Students showed increased enthusiasm in writing over the weeks. Their word counts and participation rose, and there's great potential for expanding this into a larger unit that could take place over the course of a semester or even an entire year.
So the changes in word count were very impressive. I'm wondering if you did any analysis of grammar conventions and see if they were just so excited that grammar went out the window, or did grammar improve as well?
That's a really good question. So yes, basically I took assessment of mechanics and grammar and found those to change totally inconsistently across the groups. I do think that essentially I was encouraging them to not pause, not plan. Those things are really important. Pausing and planning are really important and part of my research, but what I was trying to help them do was get that started out. So.
Thank you, Barak.